Hey, welcome back to Heaven's Vault, episode 5 of our deep dive. Today we're going to talk about level design, and that's going to start here in the heart of the Cyclones. There are two basic ways to design levels for story games. One is to only put in a few important things, and the other is to put in a lot of random junk. This game is very much a few important things sort of approach, so we're going to take a look at how they split up their various pieces to try and make that level have decent pacing.
Here, in the middle of the hurricane, there was a house. It was fine. Tucked in below the overhanging rock. Wooden beams, mud brick walls, shutters. Large enough for two families to argue over. It would have been measly on Iox and grand on Elbereth. But here, it was impossible.
So one of the things that you may have noticed is that we warped down to this location and there was nothing. And then we walked around the corner and we got the grand reveal. That's a pacing technique that you use if you are trying to do a grand reveal. It can be pretty challenging to do a grand reveal directly after a dislocation, after you've teleported or woken up or whatever. It generally is more impressive if the player walks over and sees the impressive thing under their own power. And because of that, just in general, these sorts of story-based games will usually hide cool things around corners if they know what they're doing. So that when we actually go from over here, where there's nothing, and then we come around the corner, we see something amazing. And in this case, they played it up even more. I guess they thought that the house wasn't impressive enough without her describing it to us, because she's the one that tells us the context of having a house in the middle of the Cyclones. And without that, the players might have been insufficiently impressed. Got a very, very basic sort of setup here where you have a direct channel into a specific part of the level. We can't really wander around. There's only one place to go, and that is over this particular spot. Six is worried about you falling. What he's actually worried about is him falling, rather than us, but that's fine. I can't tell if he's saying something and my screen was cutting it off due to a glitch or what, but just go ahead and take a look at the smoke. I wonder what that smoke is. Yep. Yeah. All right, well, let's pop on over. I don't need to do any more random chattering with the bot right now. All right, we're across. Hooray. Now we're doing a reverse shot so we can see that the robot's missing, and we got a little horror sting. I don't know if you heard that. This is another fun basic technique. A fun basic technique for making these levels have some pacing is that you change the dynamic. In this case, one of the characters is now gone. By having the characters split up, you can add a little bit of tension to this game. And you can add a little tension to the level. And that's a really great way to make sure that the level doesn't feel completely flat. Obviously, there are a lot of ways to do that. Another way would be to do something like the floor collapses beneath us and we are actually shunted down into the basement or something. Or maybe something starts happening above us. Something to add tension to what is otherwise just a story, a passive story level.
The ghosts were still here, cooking, reading, doing whatever ghosts do. The house was empty, but it hadn't been abandoned.
So we're going to cut down on the number of interstitial dialogues that we go through, the number of these little QR dialogues, but we're still going to cover some of them. just because, we don't want to spend all year doing these videos. Why would anybody need to bring a weapon out here? Behind her is this giant smoke cloud and debris. So everywhere we go, there are only a couple of things to interact with. Some of them are in the distance, and some of them are up close. But this isn't like Life is Strange, where you search through, dozens of drawers and find lots of pointless stuff that's just fun to find. This is very much focused on keeping things laser targeted on the story and the experience of the main character. That can be good, it can be bad. It's a very different kind of story game. There are story games where the story is the important part, and there are story games where the character is the important part. In Life is Strange, learning pointless shit about the random NPCs was a big part of the experience. In this game, there really aren't any NPCs worth learning about. We just find them here and there and then move on with our lives. All of the NPCs we do find we talk to a lot of people, but they're not like companions or competitors or anything. They're just described very briefly with a specific characteristic or personality, and that's all we ever really learn about them. For the most part. Oh, look, an inscription. Well, there's God, or us, I can't remember which. Our? Is that our? It's certainly more like we. It might be I. I think it's I. And then there's that lightning, and there's an X. So we can go ahead and presume that that's fear. And then this would be lightning, and an X, and a little heaven symbol. So I'm going to have to say that's death. But who knows? So we're uncovering the secrets of the house. Now the fun thing about a dialogue engine like what we've got here, a context-driven engine, is that if we'd gone downstairs first, we might have discovered different things first. The hard part about that is you would have to write multiple dialogue examples. You'd have to write a different set of dialogue if we come back up here and discover this after we've been downstairs. There are a lot of ways around that. One way is that whichever bed you discover first has the first dialogue, and whichever bed you discover second has the second dialogue. There are other ways, for example, locking down the upstairs so you can't go back up after you go back down, but that always feels cheap unless you're like really warned ahead of time. And of course you can always just write sufficiently generic stuff that you don't need to have any worry about what the player has discovered before, which is largely the approach they took in this game. It doesn't always work out though. Let's head downstairs. And now we're back on track with the normal experience, where the tension has been relieved. We're no longer worried about the robot. Now, the reason that they relieve that tension is because they didn't back it up. You can't have that tension last very long because you aren't providing more examples of it. We've gone inside and started looking around, and of course we've forgotten all about the fact that the robot abandoned us. If she had talked more about the fact that the robot abandoned her over the course of our exploration, that would have kept the tension high, but it would have distracted from our search for clues. So they just resolve the tension, and it works out fine. It's just it was just there to provide a pacing difference. Oh, look, a fire poker. Well, you know what? Trained by adventure games from classic times, I'm going to keep it, and as you might expect, it's important. Everything that you can click on is important. Some of it is just information, some of it is stuff, But there's nothing wasted, nothing random. Even here, what we're doing is we're clicking on something that's almost useless. It's almost just random stuff, but it's teaching us more of these words. The water goddess blesses the fire. This little swoop and shtoop means element as far as I can tell, and that looks an awful lot like fire. That's a good question. There's a lot of good questions about what they did for living here, since it's in the middle of nowhere and there's no resources. Now, clearly this dialogue keeps track of whether you found a bed upstairs or not. I don't think the bed upstairs does. I think the bed upstairs probably just has a generic statement regardless of whether you discover it first or second. But who knows? Depends on how aggressive they were feeling when they wrote this part of the script. It's a lot of work to write, duplicate commentary based on which events have happened first and which events have happened second. That said, I think that there are practices you can use, or I don't know what you want to call them, design fundamentals, progressions might be the best word, for trying to minimize the amount of excruciating effort it takes you to build this sort of content without minimizing the player's experience. And I think we'll talk about that some other time. But in short, the reason that it's so difficult for the player to choose between going downstairs and seeing this bed first or staying upstairs and seeing that bed first is because walking down the stairs is a low, it's a low hesitation act. You're not going to look at the stairs and agonize over whether to go down in general. There are lots of reasons why you might choose to go down pretty quickly, assuming that the whole house is your playhouse and you can just read whatever you want whenever you want. For example, you want to look for your robot, so you go downstairs. Now, the conventions of the game, this sort of game, maybe you will do what I did and search upstairs first, but I wouldn't say that that's a guarantee. There are other kinds of progressions that might make it a little bit easier to handle where the player is planning to go first. Or rather, what's in the first place the player plans on going. Here we are. So what do we think this means? The first time I translated this treasure chest, I could not believe... this coffer lid. I couldn't believe my my translation, because I was like... yeah, this resembles bless. You really think so? So I was like, treasures of enormous value? Is that really what I'm going to say is on this coffer? Projecting much? Well, guess what? It wasn't me that wrote that script. So we're being reminded of our duties to Miari. What we're going to do now is lift up the lid and see what sort of vast treasures are inside this unassuming box. Golly gee, if only there was a thing. Why would I... So I can lever the lid with the vicious-looking sword, right? The vicious-looking sword is an ancient artifact. The first time I went through this, I didn't find a vicious-looking sword. I found something else because it's kind of random. But the fireplace poker was enough to open it. And I grabbed the fireplace poker, so you'd think that I would have used that rather than the priceless sword.
The greatest treasure I ever found. From inside the coffer, from the distant past of the nebula's once great empire. It was a crown.
So this is the crown of the emperor. And what's it doing out here? There are other questions that, depending on how things go, you can do in different ways. For example, the corpse is missing. And I don't think we talked about that, but who stole the corpse? It must have been Janiqui, right? So there's lots of things that you can learn here in different orders and in different amounts, depending on where you focus your efforts, which is very surprising in terms of the amount of effort it takes to actually do that. I think this is probably on rivers. Well, isn't that sky or air? Well, we'll see in a minute here. On rivers of light, we sail forever. I'm like 95% sure. All right, hooray. So what I was talking about earlier is I'm surprised that there is a mandatory fire poker on that fireplace. And I'm really quite surprised that the mandatory fire poker isn't the only thing that can open this chest. They let me use a priceless artifact to open it instead. That's quite a surprise. I'm not sure why they scripted that. It's kind of interesting. Look, here's another knife. This house is just full of weapons this time. I think that this one's always a knife because it was a knife last time too. So I think that this pacing is a little bit wrong. There are a couple of things that you can do to try and make the pacing flow a little bit better here. Because we just went from discovering the greatest thing we've ever seen to just wandering into the next room and picking up another piece of crap and immediately going into another translation gameplay element. That's not really the best pacing. So what I would recommend is trying to figure out ways to make your great discoveries always happen, not necessarily at the end of the level, but in a place where you can have a good minute of something cool happening. Because that great find is a reward, and you need to be like, dur, 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 dur. Wow, I think I'm maxing out the mic. Hopefully that's not too loud. We'll find out, I suppose. Pardon me if there's a lot of me maxing out the mic. But you need to do like Link, you know? The reason we know that Link's cool new toy is cool is because he holds it up above his head and gets fanfare. Same thing, but much longer and deeper for this kind of game. Excuse me. Hooray. There are still some things left to find in this house. It's quite dense. By the way, that little visual thing where when we turn and walk in a different direction, our character poofs into and out of existence. I really like how that ended up looking. I don't think I would have ever thought of creating a game that looks like that. That is such a unique way to have a character move. But in the end, it really does lend itself to the theme of the story quite well. Because the story is all about things being forgotten and left behind, things in the past. And that's a nice little way to put it, don't you think? I'm pretty sure that what's in here is not random. I'm almost positive it's always the same. Yeah? Go through. Yeah, there it is. Ghost's Wake, huh? No one goes to Ghost's Wake. But this was before no one went there. Maybe. So another trick you can use for the inscription game like this, if you have a soft pacing minigame, you don't want to flood the players with an unending deluge of soft-paced minigames. So what you can do is you can have it so that the player gets a blurb the first time they interact, and then the second time they interact, they get the minigame. You have to be a little bit careful with that, because if the player is not expecting to have to click multiple times, then they can just not do it. But if you're like this game, and when you click, the option to click goes away, then the player will know that there's more to do, more clicking to be done. And even if they're not in the mood for a minigame, they're opting into the minigame by clicking again. They know that they want to go deeper into that particular observation. And that's actually a really good way to figure this sort of thing out in general. Every time the player clicks on the same thing, they want more of that. And that's like deeper. And that's a great way to nest this sort of information. So you can just go deeper and deeper and give them more and more detailed and slower paced information as they dig down. One of the small issues that we've got with one of the small issues I've got with this is that it's possible for the player to learn a huge amount wandering around like this, and which is great, right? But a lot of the contexts don't take that into account. For example, even now, we don't really have a lot of information. We have a lot of information, but what we're going to be treated like we don't have any. We don't have any new information, which is a little bit, I don't know. It's not really a disappointment, but it's less than it could have been. Why did Renba come out here? There's nothing to find. What? There's nothing to find? There's stolen corpses, ancient maps, a frigging emperor's crown. There's nothing to find? Even just it being a moon in the middle of a cyclone would be a worthy find. That is such a strange thing to say. And we're definitely maxing out the mic a little bit much. I'm going to just turn it down a touch here. Sorry about that. Well, he took corpses, or a corpse. We know that much. So
After the dead air of the house, it was good to see the sky again.
We're outside again. Woo-ha. Woohoo. No. Nope. No. Can you imagine just going back to the hopper, going back to the ship at this point? There's a burning wreck behind us. Amazing that we would even be given that option, to be honest. Heresy's not exactly nearby. So if this is home, maybe live and here or today or again. These are all good, but I happen to know that this means and, I believe. Yeah, I can't actually remember what this word is for some reason. Let's go ahead and say it's again. It's probably here. Let's go ahead and make it here. That makes more sense. I'll go with the boring version. Seems like it's more likely to be the case. And what I'm doing is I'm tracking down all of the places that we can find script, because that way I'll be able to have a better script result, which is good for the Let's Play. You know, for playing through something, you wanna have as much information as you can give. So what does this mean? Well, it's exactly like forever, except for instead of having lots of ticks next to it, it has one tick on the other side. So that's probably meaning either one or day, right? We'll call this light of day. I think this is actually different from the first time I played. I think the last time it was something like protect us from the waters above. So we're making up some ideas here. This is a great way to do it. If the player is supposed to figure something out, have the PC figure it out. But a great way to do that is to make it interactive. So the PC, the character, starts to talk about what they think is going on, and then the player gets to take guesses, educated guesses. The guesses can be written so that they always go the same place, or so that they go to two different places, both of which are true. For example, if I were to guess that the thing on the top was not a telescope but a transmitter, then that would still lead me to the same basic ideas of this place being for observation or communication, because both of those things can be true. It's not an either or. I won't be wrong if I take the other path. I'll just be a different kind of right. I don't know if that's what they did here. I don't think so, but it is something you can do. By making it so that there are two different kinds of right, you can have the player figure things out, and it feels like they're in control and being the smart one. We're keeping up with the callbacks to previous places. We've been talking about Mayerzy's giant statue and all sorts of stuff like that, just to make the universe feel like it exists and is huge. And in this sort of game, it's very easy to oh, that's not right. It's very easy to end up with something very, very primitive, because the actual story is, easy to boil down to its basic components. Like so and so went over to this particular place and died here. That's the story, right? So in order to make it more interesting, you don't have to muddy the waters, but you have to connect the waters. You want the story that you're telling to tie into the larger narrative, the overall adventure that we're having. And a big way to do that is to talk about things that have come before. So as far as we can tell right now, the emperor came here and died here and brought his crown. I don't remember this. I think that this one might be new. Or to this particular playthrough. I think it might be a little different each time. Hooray, I got blessed right. That looks an awful lot like inside, doesn't it? A place between two earths, a place between two mountains. Let's call it fields. I think last time it was about the water in the channel rather than the fields around it. So we can actually come this way. The first time I played, I didn't realize that we had access to this area over here. Oh, you big wuss. This is the water goddess again. So the water goddess cult is coming out here as well. Why would I say this belongs on Iox? What a strange thing to say. It belongs on Maerzi. Why would I even assume it should go to Iox? Iox is the robot place. Maerzi is the water goddess place. Alright, so we've got a whole bunch of options as to what this might be. But in this case, it seems like it's probably related to time, because this looping cycles thing is the symbol for time. That's a big part of the game, the idea that time loops endlessly around. So we can call that past. I don't know if that's true or not, though. It seems like a B to me. This is different than the first time I played. And then here we've got a lot of strikes, and then this field plant thing. So past fields be lush. That seems a little bit... This seems like an odd thing to say, past fields be lush. So maybe this doesn't mean past. Mayfields be lush, I guess. That doesn't seem right, though. Oh, well, I'm allowed to get them wrong. Yeah, see, when she says that, it means that I was an idiot. So earlier I said that one of the ways you can do things is that if you click repeatedly, it means the player wants to dive down deeper and deeper into whatever they're looking at, and will take slower and slower, activities there. Fine, you don't have to worry about the pacing. But there's also the option of having several different things to look at and then choosing between them and continually, just doing one and then the other in whatever order you prefer. I actually don't think that's as good. I find that idea is a little bit weak, because the way that you interact with that, and you just keep choosing option A, option B, option C. You're repeatedly choosing, but it's not letting the player. It's not letting the player. It's not taking advantage of the fact that the player is showing interest. It's just letting the player read out of a script. It's not quite as interesting. You wuss. Oh, it's already been 30 minutes. Let's go ahead and pause this episode here, and we'll start the next episode immediately.